afterwards to anyone who misses it or wants to listen again. Hello to everyone, some familiar faces, some new faces, me as well. Very warm welcome to all of you this evening. My name is Yael. I work on the employment team here at Work Avenue and joined by my colleague Richard this evening, who's going to be co-hosting the session with me. A little bit of background, just briefly. For a number of years now, we have been running a career networking evening for students and graduates, which took the format of a speed networking session where we had professionals representing a range of sectors in one room in the evening, and it was very busy and noisy and lots of one-to-one conversations going on. Obviously, we realized that wasn't going to be viable for this year. So over the month of April, we have been splitting different sectors on different evenings, and we've had a number of professionals who've very kindly given up their time to talk about their careers, career pathways to students and graduates who are starting out on their career and making career choices at the moment. So this evening, we are going to be focusing on the areas of civil service, public sector, not-for-profit and politics. I'm really delighted that we've got 6 professionals with us this evening representing those industries. So what we're going to do in a second is going to ask all the professionals to talk a little bit about themselves. Just before I do, I just ask Richard to briefly introduce himself as well, his role at Work Avenue.
Yeah, so I'm Yael's colleague in the employment team. I'm a careers and employment advisor. Been at Work Avenue for about 3.5 years. So if any of you from sort of listening to tonight, or if any of you it's your first time here, you can book a careers and employment advice meeting with myself or one of my colleagues. If any of you want help with your CV, interview skills, job searching, LinkedIn, or anything that's going to help you on your journey. So nice to meet you all.
Right, thanks, Richard. So we're going to start the session in a second with professionals talking about themselves and career pathways. If anybody has any questions, you're welcome to put them into the chat box. Richard's going to be monitoring that. Alternatively, we are going to have open forum for questions after all the short presentations. So it's going to be your chance this evening. If you have questions, please feel free to ask them. Okay. So I think enough hearing from me. I think we're going to start this evening with the civil service. If I could come first to you, Gideon, that's okay, Gideon Weeder. Just a few minutes about your career, how you got into that, any advice you have for people starting out wanting to get into the sector.
Absolutely. So I'll kind of speak to that for a couple of minutes, and please do ask any other questions. So I suppose of my kind of academic background at university, I did a Master of Public Policy that was actually done in America, but I don't think that kind of, obviously that is geared towards working as a civil servant or in government, but I don't think that's essential. My first proper job was actually in the non-profit sector, working for an organization called the Interlink Foundation. So that's based in Stamford Hill. And I think that kind of gave me some kind of good background as to kind of working in the kind of non-private sphere, but also working with local government. And kind of what I did there, I did for 9 months, kind of gave me a bit of background to jump into the civil service. So I now work for the Department for Transport. Originally, I was working on roads policy, so that's kind of advising ministers on where best to invest road investment funds. And now I work on HS2, or more specifically, the redevelopment and regeneration around Euston Station. So as I said, I think the civil service recruitment process is quite transparent. If you do a bit of Googling, you'll be able to see kind of the mark scheme or what they're looking for from candidates. So when I applied first time around to the civil service, or for the first job, kind of used that as an important base to kind of understand where I needed to be, what I needed to have maybe done, all the skills I might needed to have, or stories I needed to tell for that interview. And obviously, in the last 4 years, I've been working, as I said, in different areas. and it's kind of been a very interesting experience. You need to be kind of good communicator. It's a lot about soft skills, and kind of good at writing, and stakeholder management. Those are kind of the core areas I think that they're often looking for. But obviously, it's you're generally more likely to need to get specialised somewhere or get some basic background. But often, kind of at entry level positions, they wouldn't expect any specific knowledge about roads or whatever you're dealing with. That's not always the case. And so
just to ask you, is there any particular degrees that you've seen are more desirable for the civil service, or they're quite open?
So currently they are quite open. I think they are seeking to get a bit more specialised. So they would be looking they would be more interested in let's say in transport, might be more interested in quantitative surveying or engineering degrees. But for the time being, as a general rule of thumb, and I think it will kind of remain the same for the next couple of years, it's fair to say kind of humanities degrees are still very common in the civil service.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you, Gideon. I think we'll probably come back with some more questions a bit later. For now, I'll move over to Dov Boonin, if you're there, Dov, who's in the civil service fast stream, and give us another perspective on working there.
How's it going?
Hi, Dov.
Everyone. I'm Dov. Yeah, nice to meet you. Nice to see you. I thought of I think the question was a little bit more. Was it? I mean, the email was more about career history. Would you rather a bit of career history or more focused?
Well, I guess tell us how you're on the civil service fast stream program at the moment. So I guess tell people, how you got into that, how the applications went, what you've been doing as part of the sort of graduate program.
Okay. So my way in was, I guess, at university. I went through that phase 1 year where I was desperate to become a management consultant. I actually applied for a lot of management consultancies with little success. Ended up spending a few summers working with sort of like NGOs, and ended up doing a fellowship with an NGO actually immediately after university for a year, for like a 1 year program, working with an NGO. So also experience in the not-for-profit sector, I guess. And what led me to the civil service was kind of, I think I really wanted to, do good, contribute to society. I wanted a job where I was, helping others and helping society. But then I was also really wanted good, thorough professional experience, and a job that would stretch me professionally and would allow me to really focus on my own professional development as well. I think that kind of the combination of those two things, I think the civil service kind of hits that sweet spot of kind of both, doing good, but also being able to focus on your own professional development. And especially the fast stream, really, especially that focuses very much on your own professional development personally. So I think that's kind of what attracted me there. And then the application process, there's some online tests which I really can't tell you much about. The sort of behavioural, what do they call them? It's been a while since I did them, but
yes, the psychometric testing.
Your situational judgment. That's one of them, isn't it? And behavioural assessments, which I don't know how they work. I just did them, and it just always, I really can't shed much light on those tests. And then you had the video interview, which is about kind of your motivations, I think it was, and particular skills you had. I mean, it's a while since I did it. And then the assessment centre, which is kind of the mainstay, the main, most famous part of the fast stream, which is their 1 day assessment centre, which is all about testing tests separately your ability to work with teams to come to agreement on a particular approach to a particular problem, as well as written skills, again presented with a problem and having to summarize all the information presented about that problem and come up with a solution, but in a written format. And then another similar exercise, you're presented with a problem, a situation, and you have to come up with a solution, but that one takes the form of an interview instead with It could be anyone, but sort of not practice, like fake interview. I mean, like an acting interview to see how you would manage that situation, but but in terms of like talking to someone about it and resolving it in that way. So that's the most well-known part of the process, application process, and certainly the most challenging. I mean, it's difficult and requires quite a lot.
I wanted to, sorry to interrupt, just to ask you briefly. I know we don't have time to go into this in detail now, but if you had, some top tips, 3 things you can say to people. We hear from quite a lot of candidates, they want to get into the civil service fast room and they find the application process very challenging. I don't know if that's the case for anyone who's here this evening. Do you have 30 seconds that you could give a couple of tips to people from your experience?
So the online tests I can't tell you much about because I don't know how they work, honestly.
Yeah, no, more that the assessment of the interview that you just mentioned. Yeah.
I think, okay, I mean, again, this is very much, my impressions, my personal take. I did this 2 years ago. I don't speak for the civil service when I say this, it's just my, based on my impressions that I got from doing this assessment process 2 years ago, and just speaking in any professional capacity here. But my sense was that they wanted someone who was genuine. I think I got the sense that they really appreciated someone who was genuine, and honest and open. Someone who had integrity, I guess. That was really my sense of things. That I would, the sort of person who wouldn't lie and pretend that they knew the answer when they didn't, and would instead actually hold their hands up and say, actually, I'm not sure, but this is how I'd go about finding that sort of attitude. I think that was something that I got the impression they really valued. Honesty. I mean, they really valued honesty. I understood as well. Also, in terms of the team working stuff, it's quite interesting actually, because one of my friends made identified this contrast between teamwork tests in an assessment centre in the private sector, which she did, and in the civil service, which she did, and that in the private sector is all about showing that you were the best, and kind of this like real determination of and a real drive to be the best and show that you're the best. Whereas the civil service teamwork exercise was a lot more about actually how do you work with others, and instead of focusing just on driving your own personal agenda or the agenda of your department, I mean, that's how it's organized, actually thinking about what's best for the public overall and what fits in with the goals of the civil service best overall, which might not necessarily be your own personal agenda, and therefore kind of working out the balance between driving your own personal agenda but also recognizing the wider public goods as well, and working with others to achieve that rather than just pushing yourself forward. Again, this is just my personal opinion and based on 2 years ago, but that was my impression that I took away.
Okay, no, thank you. I think what you've highlighted is a very important point in general about the understanding of the culture of the organization that you are interviewing at or applying to. So obviously the public sector, the private sector, the not-for-profit sector will have different sort of cultural norms and different values. I think definitely in the civil service, from what I know, they like people to be able to represent and demonstrate that they match with those values. So that's something anyone who's applying there should be aware of this. Okay, Dov, thank you for now. Hopefully we'll come back to you a little bit later on if people have questions. So if I could move across to a slightly different area now, more in the sort of political strategy field. Anna, hi, good evening.
Hi.
Anna, okay, so do you want to just tell everyone a little bit about you and your role?
Yeah, certainly. Good evening. Thank you for asking me to come along. So I actually started working in the House of Commons after I graduated. I did a course at university that, back in the day when I was at university, which was quite a long time ago, was quite unusual in that the third year was a placement year. And so by the time I graduated, I'd had 6 months working in the House of Commons, which I did in my year off. I then was, timing, very fortunate, happened to coincide with the 1992 election. So I worked on a general election campaign for a month. And then I had 6 months working in Congress in the States, and then another 6 months working in the House of Commons. So by the time I graduated, I had a wealth of very practical experience under my belt, which was very unusual at the time. And it helped me enormously when I was applying for jobs. It didn't necessarily help me get the job as such, but it certainly got me interviews. I went to work in the House of Commons. I didn't really know what I wanted to do in politics. I loved politics. Careers advice at that time was sparse. And so I just applied for loads of jobs. I applied for lobbying jobs. I didn't apply for the civil service, didn't appeal to me, didn't want to do it. And I happened to get a job working for a PPC, prospective parliamentary candidate, who was standing in a very, very safe seat. So I worked for him for 6 months, helped run his campaign, and then worked in House of Commons. And I loved it. I was there for 10 years, absolutely loved it. Thought I would never find a job I'd like as much as that. Then he decided to retire when I was 9 months pregnant. So what most people do when their MP retires is they find another MP to work for. And I took this career break to have my second child for about 4 months. And I sort of was looking at this epiphany of my life. I thought, I could do anything I want. I've got no job. I can go and do anything. And it kind of came back to politics again. And then my old boss set up a lobbying agency and asked me to come back and work with him. And I did, thinking if I didn't like it, I'll just go and find another job. And then 3.5 years ago, he retired and I took over the agency. And I've been lobbying ever since, and probably will do so for the rest of my career because I love it. I know everyone thinks that lobbyists are dreadful people, particularly at the moment. I do not have the current Chancellor on speed dial. And frankly, even if I did, I probably wouldn't be calling him. But I think that from my point of view, as somebody who owns and runs a small agency, the advice that I would give is it is a hugely competitive field. I don't wish to be negative, but every time I advertise for a job or an internship, I am inundated with 100, 150 CVs. And even when you take out the ones that haven't read the job description, there's a really good batch of candidates. Practical experience it will set you apart from other candidates, because if I don't have to explain to somebody how a select committee works and what Hansard is when they come in to work for me, that is huge. Good writing skills, good communication skills. I don't care if nobody knows anybody who works in the House of Commons, because frankly, if you want to go into public affairs and you can run a decent campaign, you can start by knowing nobody there. It doesn't matter, because that's really not what lobbying is about, despite what some people might think. And persevere, really persevere, just write and keep in touch with people, keep in touch via LinkedIn, ask if you can have 5 minutes by telephone. I have lots of people that say, can I just pick your brains for 5 minutes? And I will always do that. And actually, you've got probably what works out to be 10, 15 minutes on the telephone to make an impression. And if I then decide, actually, this girl sounds quite good, I might see if I can offer them an internship. It's making those connections. I cannot underline enough how important it is just to make contacts. It doesn't matter if you don't know anybody, just use LinkedIn. There's a lobbying register, which is a list of all the lobbying agencies that exists. So the resources are out there, and make those connections and use the websites available to try and get some practical work experience as well.
Thank you, Anna. That's great advice. I was going to ask you what you look for in people and advice you'd give, but I think you've covered it already well. And another point I just endorsed what you said is about the networking. We've heard this on all of the careers webinars so far, and I'm sure we'll hear it more. And advice we give at Work Avenue to people: network, speak to people. It's not just about, can you give me a job? It's about making connections. Who else should I speak to? Finding out information, having conversations. So definitely for, this type of field of work, which Anna said obviously is very, very competitive, you want to give yourself the best chance that you can. So great.
There is one other thing, Yael. There are a lot of lobbying agencies. It's an industry which I personally think is just going to grow and grow. And I'm sure you said this as well, do your homework. So an agency like mine is a small agency. We only do lobbying. We don't do the big communications mix that a Webbers will do, or Bellenden or other big agencies. And we will not attract a client like Coca-Cola or Barclays. So you have to work out what kind of agency you want to go into. There are pluses and minuses to big and small agencies, but when you're talking to people, make sure you understand what it is that they are offering, so that you can sound informed and interested, and look up a bio. The number of people who have got in touch with me have been to Leeds University and do not mention it at all. And I'm thinking, for God's sake, it says on our website, I went to Leeds. Make that point, make that connection, anything that shows that you've done your homework.
Yes, 100%, exactly. All the things that you can get right easily, you know, you can get them right. People want to see someone, especially I think in the early stages where you don't have that much experience in your career. It's about your enthusiasm, motivation, passion, and softer skills for those to come across. Great, thank you, Anna. If I can move on to Helen Meyer, please.
Hi.
Hi, Helen.
Hi. So I started off working in the Jewish community for 5 years, and it was a fantastic start to my career. I got involved in really interesting projects, and I met really interesting people. And importantly, some of the people that I met took me on to the next part of my career, which was 5 years working in government. I completely agree with everything you've said. It's all about networking and building connections. I mean, for me, most importantly, the kinds of jobs that I've done, I never knew existed, and I would never have known they existed or found what I wanted to do had I not met these people and talked to these people and had their help along the way. We always hear that so many jobs aren't advertised, and that's definitely the case for me. Particularly when you're working in kind of discrete private environments. I mean, I did 5 years in the community, and then I moved into number 10, and I was working for the Prime Minister, and I'd have never known at the outset how you would get into a role like that. So yeah, I really agree with that. And I think on the civil service point, huge respect to anyone who gets into the fast stream or in from the outside, because it's so difficult to do. I was very lucky I got seconded in, and that created the opportunity for me, but it is really challenging. And I think people I know who've been successful have spoken to other civil servants. I mean, the government is obsessed with these competencies. They're online, you can find them and look at them, and plenty of civil servants that you'd connect with would be happy to help you and guide you through the process. So I think building relationships has been so key in my own experience, and I think just following your heart is really key. I sort of started out on the wrong path, in that I went to Leeds University to study audiology, which was sort of never my interest, but it was while I was at Leeds that I realised I loved volunteering and the charity work, and that my heart was really in the public sector. So that decision totally put me back onto the right path. So I think following your heart all the way through is really important, and talking to people as well, because I think there's lots of different routes in, and they're not always the routes that are advertised. So yeah, so I did my time in number 10, then I took a little break, and then I came back and I started working for the Lord Mayor of the City of London, looking after his programme office there. And I've only just recently started working in the private sector for the first time. So I thoroughly recommend working in the public sector. I think working in the Jewish community was a great experience, and often sort of underrated. People don't realise kind of the experience it can give you and the connections it can set up for you. So like Gidon said, starting at Interlink, it was a great kind of stepping stone for me. So I'd highly recommend it.
Great, thank you, Helen. Yeah, I was going to ask you if you felt like the experience that you gained in the community first gave you an advantage, I guess, to later roles that you have moved into, because you've had a really interesting career pathway actually across all the sectors.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. I think the community is really diverse, and everyone helps everyone. So yeah, I think it is a great opportunity. And there are so many different organisations. I mean, I worked for 3, and each of, I mean, my first role I saw advertised, but the others were people who approached me about those roles. So yeah, I think there's so much opportunity, and it's well worth looking into, because sort of probably for so many different areas of work, there is a Jewish community, there is a charity somewhere that's involved, or they've got trustees and they work in that area. So it's just kind of like a ready-made network, and I guess Work Avenue itself is a great example of that.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Helen. Perfect. On the note of working in the community, I think I'll move over now to Aryeh Miller from UJS, CEO of UJS. Tell us about your experience of your career in the not-for-profit community sector.
Thank you very much, and it's great to be here also as a partner to all of these sessions. It is wonderful to hear from such great people and to see so many current and recent graduates also here. I guess kind of my career has taken me through a number of not-for-profits, both charities and non-charity not-for-profits, and rather than just talk about kind of me, myself, and I think one thing that I do just want to highlight, and that hopefully people have heard, that is slightly thematic across the sector, is that working in the not-for-profit sector is not a barrier to then moving on to other things. And actually, I hope others, those who I've worked with and those who I haven't, would agree that actually often it is that could be the thing that sets you apart in those interviews, in those networks, and in those spaces where you're seeking those next steps. For me, working in the not-for-profit sector, working in the charitable sector, rather than a specific degree that one needs to have or a specific qualification, I think it's that kind of intangible factor of passion. It is very difficult to work for a not-for-profit or a charity that you're not personally passionate about. There is a risk that comes along with that, is that you become a professional volunteer, and you end up working kind of 7 days a week, 24 hours in the day, and not being remunerated for that kind of level of commitment. But I have always been very fortunate that every job that I have had has been something that I would probably do for free, although I would never tell my employers that. Because that's what working in the charitable sector is. That's what it's all about. It's about finding something that you really care about, you're passionate about. For me, that's the Jewish community, that's Israel, that's anti-Semitism, that's Zionism. For others, that may be medical, that may be children, that may be adults, that may be vulnerable people. There are so many opportunities. What it does do, what working in the not-for-profit sector does do, in my experience, and again, I think others may well agree, is it gives you experience far beyond what you would get at the same level in the private sector or in the corporate world. You are propelled into meetings with prime ministers, with politicians at a very early stage in your career, particularly in not-for-profits and charities in the Jewish community. And you're given responsibility that probably you would not be given in the corporate sector, because in the charitable sector, there's less money, there's less people, and so there's more need to do these things as individuals. That can lead to a bit of burnout, and I think my big piece of advice to anyone thinking about working in the charitable sector or in the not-for-profit sector is look after yourself, plan your time, make sure that you're not working 24 hours in the day and 7 days a week. But it also comes with a lot of reward. I don't believe that there are many 9 to 5, so to speak, in the not-for-profit sector. I certainly haven't found any yet. But it comes with a lot of value, a lot of reward. And what it does do, as Helen was just saying, it opens a lot of doors. It can be the stepping stone to the next opportunity, whether that's in the same sector or outside of the sector. I think I am very proud to work in the charitable sector. I'm proud to employ around between 5 and 8 new graduates every single year at UJF, because we are an organisation that's proud to give people those opportunities, and whether that's sitting at a JSOC Friday night dinner or going to Buckingham Palace to meet the Queen, both of which happen near enough every single year. These are the opportunities that you get in the not-for-profit, and it is really an opportunity to learn new and exciting skills to then apply in every stage of your life moving forward.
Great. Yes, I agree. Can endorse everything you say about working in the community. Yeah, very rewarding jobs, things that you do, working with people, and obviously you need to have a passion for whatever the cause is that you decide to work for. There are many different opportunities around within the not-for-profit sector, and as we say, gives you transferable skills and network to be able to move forward afterwards. Great, thank you, Arya. And finally, Michelle. Michelle, are you here?
I am. Thank you. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yes, I'm Michelle.
Hello, so I'm Michelle Brostoff. Thanks for having me this evening. So I've worked in financial regulation and central banking now for nearly 20 years. So I was at Birmingham University. I studied economics with French. I had a year in Paris at the Sorbonne doing economics in France. So it was all good. And I was active in JSOC. I noticed the little quote on Arya's. I was a contemporary with Alan Sennett, so it was, you know, sad to see his name, but obviously his inspiration lives on, so that was good to see. So yeah, I how I got into working in, I guess, the public sector for so many years is while I was in Paris in my third year, I found out about an internship at the Financial Services Authority. So I applied for that. That was just, going across for a regular interview. And I was lucky enough to be offered, one of these summer internships. So it was 8 weeks spent in London. I'm from Leeds originally, so it was all very exciting. Having a job, I stayed with an uncle in London, so it all worked out. And then I still had to, it wasn't a guarantee that you'd get onto a graduate scheme at the FSA at the time. This was back in sort of 2002. So I still had to apply and go through the assessment centre, which was group exercise, a maths test, and various other, the psychometric tests that have been mentioned earlier. But it was helpful that I sort of had the practical experience there the previous year for the internship. So since I was on the graduate scheme, it was really good because they sort of teach you, as people have said, you learn about how to apply your soft skills, and then you can apply those to any subject, whether it's supervising banks or insurance firms or whatever it might be. And I, got involved in some really interesting work around like financial education, working with the BBC. We did this thing called the debt test, where we put something on the BBC website and tried to, encourage people to not get into debt. So I felt, I felt throughout my career, it's doing good for the public. I do like the educational side of it and protecting consumers. During the financial crisis in 2009, I was working on sort of Northern Rock, the Icelandic banks, and then went on to look at bankers' bonuses. Like, I quite like working on all the sort of high profile issues, and it's good to be able to tell your friends, you can't go into details, but you can at least, they can relate to what you're talking about. So that's quite exciting. And you feel like you're actually, trying to make a difference. So that's all good. I'm now a senior manager on what's called policy and customer engagement at the Bank of England. And essentially, as I tell people, that's essentially looking after the central bank's gold and their accounts at the Bank of England. So I get to go down into the gold vaults, which is a very, it's a real privilege and a treat to see all the gold there. And it's good. It's not something that I ever expected to be doing, but and I should emphasize as well that you do not by any means have to do economics or have an economics degree to work at the Bank of England. So I should explain that the FSA sort of moved and became part of the Bank of England. It's all politics, but that's, I've sort of stayed with the same organization, but it's transitioned over the years. But I've done so many different roles that it honestly feels like I've worked for different organizations. So I've been very lucky. Yeah, as I say, there is a very good graduate scheme at the Bank of England. They're really looking for sort of diverse applicants, people that have studied different things, different universities, different backgrounds. That's a real focus at the moment. Diversity and inclusion is a very big theme at the bank. They send people, I've been to schools, in deprived areas, trying to encourage school leavers, not even just graduates, but people at all levels to sort of apply and be interested in working for the bank. And we also offer industrial placements as well for that third year that I was talking about, how I spent my third year out. Obviously, that's quite common now. So we offer those sorts of placements at the bank as well. And just finally to say that, I mean, I help with the recruitment of graduates as well when they apply at the bank. And we've got a graduate on my team at the moment. She's still based up in Liverpool because there's no point moving down to London at the moment. We're all working remotely. So, but it works. We're all managing to sort of work in this new virtual world. So yeah, just if you're interested at all in, as I say, we do more than just set interest rates. There's a lot of things we do. It's really varied, and it's a good place, as people have said, to sort of build a network and really feel like you're doing something at the core of the UK financial system, really. So I'll stop there, but happy to take any.
Okay, Michelle, just to ask you, you said you're involved with graduate recruitment a little bit. I was going to ask you about this. What would you say you look for, even aside from the degree and the qualifications? What do you look for in terms of sort of soft skills or interests?
Yeah, well, as I say, I mean, yes, if you're applying for a graduate scheme, you obviously have to have a degree, yes. But as I said, there's no set requirement. So really, it's similar to as one of the previous speakers said around, what they said about teamwork and being part of a team is really important. The whole there's no I in team and all of that. So some of the kind of exercises have been around things like designing the new £5 note or things like that, and trying to think about what could, what's representative of UK society. I mean, for example, our latest £50 note is featuring Alan Turing, the scientist, and so on. That's going to be, coming out in June. So it's all, it's about being aware of what's going on in the world as well. And sort of bringing that to the bank. So what people have said about, maybe working for the community, volunteering, all of that is so highly regarded. I can't emphasize enough. I mean, the bank really encourages its staff to do volunteering. I do, once a week, I do calls with Age Concern, and it's all, they give you time to do volunteering even during the working day. So that can help. As I say, even if you don't have paid experience on your CV, get involved, do some community work or volunteering, and that's going to be, stand you in good stead.
Great, thank you very much. So for anyone who's interested and listening and has a bit of time to go, it's just good practical advice. Thanks so much, Michelle. Okay, so thank you to all the professionals for all the insights that you've given. Were really, really interesting and helpful. Now I'm going to open the floor up. Does anybody have a question that they would like to ask to any of the professionals, to all of the professionals? Please go ahead and speak. Anyone have any questions? Yeah. Okay, well, I do have a few questions already, so we'll start with those. If anyone thinks of any questions, if you don't want to speak, you can put your question into the chat and we will be happy to read that out. That's not a problem. So one of the areas that was covered by a couple of the speakers just now was thinking about cultural fit for the organizations you're going to, what they would look for and what sort of thing works for you, and also how you would demonstrate that you would match with what it is that they are looking for. So if I could just ask, maybe I'll come to you first, Helen, because you've worked actually in 3 different sectors. What would you say sort of the main cultural differences are between the not-for-profit sector, the public sector, and the private sector? I know it's a big question, but maybe in summary, what do you think?
When you say sort of cultural differences, do you mean in how you present, or?
Just sort of, I guess, the working environment that you would be in, what the culture is like in those sort of those areas.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I think probably the commonality is I think is always sort of utmost sort of professionalism. And I mean, people talked before about honesty. There's always people there to help you. I think when you're starting out on your career journey, just always being professional, but seeking help where you need it is important. I think for me in the areas that I've worked in, I think being discreet is really important. Like if I had a social media kind of presence, you know, that probably wouldn't have helped me, because I'd be applying into roles where I was looking after principals, and I understood how to manage that principal's kind of sort of image and how my behavior might impact on them. And I heard stories when I was in number 10, you know, they fell out with a journalist, and suddenly that journalist was writing up in the Daily Mail about how one of the PM's aides was, you know, off boozing or whatever it is. So I think always being kind of professional and conscious about how you present yourself, because the first thing anyone does when you apply for a job is go on social media and look at what image you're projecting. And I think in this day and age where that information is instantly accessible, you need to be kind of careful and very mindful of that. I'd say, to be honest, in my experience working in the community, I sometimes saw things that were slightly maybe less professional, because sometimes the boundary gets a little bit blurred. I mean, we all have contacts who work in the community. Some might be your first cousin, and just always maintaining that kind of professionalism is really key, because sometimes in the way that things are quite cozy because everyone knows each other doesn't necessarily apply in the outside world. So kind of I think always being conscious of that is really key. And I mean, Arya made the point very succinctly that you can suddenly find yourself in a room with heads of state and heads of government, and I certainly did, and just sort of knowing how to behave. I mean, I found that everyone will engage in small talk with you, whether it's someone who comes into your office or it's a head of state. You know, everyone is just they're just people at the end of the day, and I don't think it's about having certain knowledge that you can suddenly start talking to them on a senior policy level or understanding something that's going on in the news necessarily. It's just about being an authentic professional human being, and I think that sort of extends across whatever sector you're in, really. So yeah, I'm not sure if that sort of directly answers your question, but
no, it does. It's very good. Just because, you know, people often ask us, it can come, you know, in the different working sectors you can have, and also large companies, small companies. As Anna said before, you know, it's the company she directs is smaller, so somebody comes and talks about wanting to be in large companies, you know, it's not going to be the right fit. So it's just, I guess, understanding first of all where you're going to be applying or interviewing to, and number two, you know, how to convey that when you are going to the interview, and also what works for you as well. Okay, thanks, Helen. Richard, I think we've got a question. Do you want in the chat? Do you want to?
Yeah, sure. So James Conn has asked for the individuals, so for the two guys in the civil service, Gidon and Dov, do you need to have non-partisan social media such as Twitter if you are applying for the fast stream there? I mean, I'm sure I'll let you answer. I've got my own opinions, but I'll let you answer. So I don't know, either Dov or Gidon. What do you think about when you're applying to the fast track when it comes to social media?
Okay, I can jump in, Gidon, unless you really wanted to jump in first.
No, go on, Dov.
Yeah. In terms of, well, actually, I want to make a quick other point that just was on my mind also. Sorry, and then I'll come to a question. Just to say that, you know, I'm currently working in the civil service, but I think something that we've seen from the different speakers today is actually, it's been really interesting having different speakers working in the private sector, public sector, and third sector, charity sector, and actually, yeah, just I think one point that's come out for me a bit is the differences between working in different sectors and how each one has its advantages. And I mean, we haven't talked about this, but obviously advantages and disadvantages, and how, you know, each one is an attractive career in its own way, and of course the possibility of moving between, as I think we've already talked about, haven't we, a bit. So just to say, yeah, it's interesting to think about, reflect on, you know, what might attract you about the different sectors, and also, you know, that you might change your mind in a few years' time and actually want to move between sectors. So sorry, I just want to highlight that point. And then back onto your question, James, sorry. Yeah, I think it probably would be advisable not to have very, very strong political opinions on social media if you're applying for the civil service. It's a bit of a hard one to answer though, because it's really important to be, impartiality is one of the key values of the civil service, and is one of the key parts of the civil service code that every civil servant signs up to. Impartiality meaning political impartiality. So the reason that's important is because is because that you as a civil servant could work to the minister who's in power. Well, typically work to the minister who's in power, which could be Conservative, or it could be Labour, or it could be another party, right? And so therefore, the minister has to have confidence in you as a civil servant that you will do the work that they ask you to do, because ultimately they're the ones who dictate what work you'll be doing, what the agenda is, and that they can trust that you will do that without regard for your own personal political agenda, and that you as a civil servant just pursue their agenda as they set it. And so if, for example, you had a significant, the answer to this question is to your actual question of whether you could or couldn't post partisan stuff on social media. It's not a straightforward yes or no question, but it's more about just a sensitivity to the duty of a civil servant to be impartial. And if, for example, you as an individual were seen as being very political, you were clearly whatever political party, whatever political affiliation, right wing, left wing, then that might undermine your credibility as a civil servant from the perspective of the minister, and they might think, actually, is the civil servant capable of delivering my agenda? Because if they have politics, different politics to me, they're at odds with mine, and that's a very important part of their identity. Might that inhibit their ability to deliver my agenda that I'm setting in my department? I think that's my answer that I would give. But I'll hand over to Gideon.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Good answer. Yeah.
Gideon, do you have anything to? Sorry, just want to see if Gideon has anything to add on that.
Hopefully, just a couple of points. Yeah, I agree with what Dov said. It's worth looking up the Civil Service Code or Code of Conduct. I think that's available online. And that kind of obviously is how a civil servant should conduct themselves. There have been people that have moved from working for an MP into the civil service. So it's kind of not to say that you can't have any trace of partisan background on your CV or social media following. I think the laws of common sense need to prevail. And if a hiring, they're not necessarily applicable to fast use, if the hiring manager's going to Google you and see or find you on Twitter and see that you've made some very colourful statements, they'll probably bear that in mind in the interview.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Yeah. A question for Anna has just come through. Someone asked, Joel Wilkinson is asking, how do you get that initial experience with a lobbying firm? As you said, Anna, when you spoke, that it's highly competitive. And he's saying, is it worth getting other political experience, perhaps with a political party, to show your interest in politics, or are there better ways to make connections within the industry?
So to answer the second question first, any political experience is useful. It not only demonstrates your interest, but actually you will pick things up, whether you're working for a political party or working for an MP or a peer or anything. You'll pick things up and you'll learn things which will give you some experience. There is no doubt about it. In terms of how do you get that golden piece of work experience, some of it is about being in the right place at the right time. Agencies do have internship schemes over the summer. They'll run them specifically for undergraduates. I sometimes take on graduates for 2 or 3 months. The problem with university holidays and parliamentary recess is that they often, at least in part, coincide. And my view always is that you don't really get very good experience when Parliament's not sitting. It's about making contacts. I get CVs coming in anytime from about January, February for students who are saying that they are looking to gain some work experience in June or July time. Parliament's still sitting. So it's a bit of a hard slog, but it is about sending off emails, making telephone calls, making contacts, because there will be agencies that will take on students for work experience. It's a bit different at the moment because a lot of people are working remotely. And there are a lot of agencies that aren't taking students on. It's very difficult to I say train in a very loose term, but to give people an understanding of what you're doing when you're not actually sitting with them. There is a website called W4MP, which advertises loads of graduate jobs in politics, and it also advertises internships and work placements and things like that. But anything you can do, it will be of help to you. There is no doubt about it.
Thanks, Anna.
Did I answer all of Joel's questions?
Yeah, that's good. That's really good. And I think you also answered a lot of it when you spoke as well about making connections and networking, LinkedIn and all the rest of it. So that's really helpful.
There is a little bit of being in the right place at the right time and just something clicking. And I've been very fortunate in my career that I've had that. And I know not everybody does, but something will happen. There is no doubt about it.
But I think, Anna, that there's a direct correlation between the right things, being in the right place at the right time and the amount of work you put in.
100%, without any doubt, yes. And if you send somebody an email asking if they offer work placements or internships and you don't hear back from them within 3 or 4 days, pick up the telephone to them. Like, don't immediately assume that everybody will reply to your emails. Pick up the telephone, and you never know where that telephone call may take you.
Anna, if you've got some free time and you want to come and be an employment advisor for a bit, you're welcome to. Everything you've said tonight is what I say to people all day long. It's great to hear. It's great to hear someone from industry reiterating the sort of things that we as employment advisors, the advice that we give. So that's really great. Thank you. Okay, we have had another question come through. Raphael Holder was asking just a question for Dov. I don't know, perhaps you could elaborate where you're kind of going with this, but he's just interested in what government departments you've worked in so far. I suppose maybe an idea of how easy it is to go from one department to another working for the civil service. Maybe that's...
And maybe also if there's a lot of differences in type of environment in the different departments you've been in.
I mean, there's loads to talk about here for sure. Yeah. So I mean, I should
in 2 minutes.
Yeah, because I'm going to have to keep you to 2 minutes.
Exactly. Let's start with. I mean, I should start talking about the fast stream really, because I think that's probably what the question's getting at. So I'm on the civil service fast stream, which is the civil services graduate scheme, and the way it works is, I mean, I didn't explain this before, is that there are 3 or 4 year programs. There's also a lot of different professions you can apply for. So you work in the civil service, but I, for example, specialize in project delivery / project management. You could also do science and engineering or digital data and technology. There's different streams to specialize in, specialist finance, for example, as well. And then what you do is you get posted in different postings, in different jobs, in different government departments over the course of the 3 or 4 years, typically 12 months, sometimes 6 months, sometimes 1.5 year postings. So you get an experience of lots of different government departments as a result, which is really great. So I personally have been on the civil service fast stream for 20 months now, and my first posting, funnily enough, I've had absolutely effectively well, I get to submit my preferences for each posting, but to what extent those are listened to or not is very variable. Let's put it that way. My first posting was in the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. A really great place to work. I did not pick that at all, but I'm very grateful to have been there. Really interesting place to work. And then my second one was in the Department for Work and Pensions, which was a real contrast. And then I've actually just been seconded, the civil service have seconded me to the Metropolitan Police for 6 months, which has been, so that's outside the civil service, still in the public sector, and is again quite a different experience. The difference between those 3 postings, I mean, I've only been in the Metropolitan Police for 7 weeks, and there's been quite a lot to get my head around, and quite an interesting time to be there as well. A difficult time to be there, actually, to be completely honest. And the difference between those 3 different postings, I mean, not that that reflects badly on the Metropolitan Police, but it's definitely been a difficult time for them, an interesting time to be there. And the difference between those 3 postings and those 3 organisations, I mean, very, very different. I could go into a lot more, but I think I'll just have to leave it there probably, won't I?
Okay,
right.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. We've probably got time for one quick question, do you think, Yael?
Yeah, there is another question from Jessica, who's asking, do any of the professionals, I think, feel that a master's degree would put somebody in a better position when applying with general experience volunteering looked upon just as highly. I'm not sure exactly what field Jessica's talking about, so I think if any of the professionals want to give an opinion on that for your fields, please speak.
My view is that I'm not particularly fussed if somebody has a master's or doesn't have a master's. I think it's about looking holistically at their studies and their practical experience.
Great, thank you, Anna. Helen, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I mean, if someone wanted to go into a very specific, discrete area of policy, then maybe. But I think experience is everything. And actually, I mean, to the question that was asked earlier about kind of getting into lobbying and things. I mean, we've got elections on the 6th of May. There are so many opportunities to volunteer, and all of the people I know who are lobbyists, they come together and they work on these different campaigns. So this is such a good way to meet people. I'd say getting stuck in and volunteering one way or the other will put you in the best possible stead for roles in general, I think.
Right, thank you, Helen.
Any
other? Yes.
Yeah, Michelle.
Yeah.
So the bank actually pays students to do we do a central bank qualification at the University of, or through the University of Warwick. They can do that, and the bank will pay graduates to do that. And then the bank will also do what we call apprenticeships. So the bank will pay if somebody wants to do a master's, the bank will sponsor somebody to do that. So I would say get a job, and then get the organisation to pay for you. So that would be my advice. Another little bit of advice before I go is find something you enjoy and get paid for it. There you go. I'll leave you with that.
I think that's an excellent way to finish off the session this evening. Thank you. Okay, so thank you so much to all of you for being here tonight. Thank you to professionals for your time and insights and advice. I think it's been really helpful. I can tell you just from the Work Avenue staff, we're really enjoying these sessions. Thank you to all the students for coming on. If anybody has any questions or things they'd like to ask us following on from this evening, please feel free to contact Richard or myself. All our details are on the Work Avenue website. And I'd like to say thank you to everybody. I don't want to keep you past the time, it's 7 o'clock. I hope you all have a really lovely evening. Thank you for joining us. Good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.